Hello, it is the Bakugo here for this fun little what if. And in case you're wondering, is Deku a ghoul, a demon, a fallen angel? None of the above. However, he is the son of a villain who, let's just say, you know, all for one and all might. They went in a three-way deadlock. It caused the death of All For One and Izuku's father. And, well, All Might had, suffered much more critical condition and injuries. And he had to, pass the quirk on to a rookie hero who, he was there. He didn't really appreciate it, getting it like this. But, he had no real choice. Now, we'll come back to this hero later. It's important that the ninth user is not revealed just yet. However, right now, let us get to Izuku. You see, his fault. Not many people knew who this guy was. It was just some random dude who was acquiring power really quickly with his strange quirk that does not matter at the moment, because Izuku has a boosted slash, fucking busted ass upgraded version of his dad's quirk. Now, you may see a Elizabeth with black hair. This is, the long descended child that would be, Elizabeth and Meliodas' kid, who is the younger sister of Nemuri Hato for this what if. Now, this is, of course, Liz Hato, Nemuri's younger sister. And Izuku Midoriya will still be Izuku Midoriya. Of course, the last name Midoriya was a fake name, but Inko keeps it for safety reasons. So, yeah. Now, Deku, he is roughly 4 years old when his quirk manifests. And his quirk manifests because Bakugo is picking on, the ship Liz Hato. Because Liz has a counter to her sister's quirk. Since Nemuri shoots out light and spirals, Elizabeth actually has the ability of darkness. And the darkness can be malleable and move to how she possesses it. If she wants it to be like tendrils, it can be like tendrils. If it can be wings, a shield. She can condense it down and make it like a blade or a hammer. A shield if she wanted to. It depends on how she uses it. One thing she even found out that is really, really weird is if she has her darkness around someone, it can glow this weird dark light, if you will. And then, once it retracts, the person's injury would be healed. Which Nemuri was so fucking jealous of due to, Elizabeth's quirk. However, there seemed to be a downside with Elizabeth's quirk. And that would be the more she used it, or the more darkness that would come out, the easier her anger would, manifest and get a hold of her. And it would be hella, and I mean hella apparent on dark, like in nighttime. Which would kind of make it seem like her personality is a fusion of Dark Shadow, I'm not going to lie. The darker it is, and the angrier she gets, the harder it is to control her power. Now, we're continuing on with Izuku, because Elizabeth is being picked on. And Izuku also gets picked on because of his weird black hair, black sclera, and glowing red eyes. Now, no one else, has associated Deku with our villain, because he only had the long black hair. And rather than black sclera, he had and hear me out on this, a double iris a double red iris in his eyes that when his quirk, you know, activated, it looked like multiple irises had taken up his place throughout his sclera, giving him a strange, almost omni-vision sense, which kind of just helped his quirk more, but I digress. As you know, Izuku tells Bakugo to knock off his shit because he constantly is like saying he's gonna be a hero, but he's being a bully. What sense does that make? Of course, Bakugo takes this challenge and, he goes to throw an explosion at Izuku's face. Now, Deku, in his moment of panic, his eyes glow red as, he sticks out his hand and the opposite of what Bakugo wanted to happen. Rather than an explosion, there was none. Did Deku counter his quirk like a quirk negation? Yes, kinda. However, now, to Deku's surprise, the opposite happened. So Bakugo's explosion was, scrapped from him. But Izuku was able to straight up blast him with an explosion almost 3 times as strong. A miracle, if you will, right before everyone's eyes. A fucked up dark miracle, but a miracle nonetheless. I love this song. This is Crazy Bitch by Buck Cherry, but this is the Butcher remix, and this shit fucking hit. Now, as I continue on with this, Izuku confused. Liz is just baffled by Izuku's power. Everyone's terrified because they don't know if Deku finessed Bakugo's quirk. So, they're calling saying, hey, some shit happened. We don't know what happened. We don't know how to handle this because we don't get paid enough. They hang up. Inko rushes in. They take Deku to the quirk doctor. And holy shit, did the doctors have a fucking heart attack when, thanks to professionalism and these people knowing Inko for quite a while, because plot. Yeah. When Inko says, yeah, she didn't know when she hooked up with that guy that he was gonna be that guy who damn near killed All Might and helped kill All for One. They're just skeptic on taking in Izuku, but they run the tests and shit, they are fucking baffled at this kid's mutation and abilities that should not exist but exist. As Inko is then told that Izuku has not just his father's base ability that lets him lets him do full manipulation of reality and allowing what shouldn't happen, and what happens, not to happen. That's what his father's quirk was. It was called antithesis. Pretty much letting him allow the exact opposite of events to happen. Now, this could either be the negation of event or the exact event happening to the person. So, if, for an example, Shigaraki were to touch Izuku could allow the counter to happen. So rather than Deku starting to decay, Shigaraki's hand would start to decay from his hand, going up his body, until Shigaraki, decides to turn off his quirk. But once he turns off his quirk, there's no hand, so are you seeing what I mean when I say what Deku's dad's quirk was busted? Now Deku gets an even more busted version of this because they find out Deku has the ability to conjure not just dreams, but people's nightmares into reality. He can conjure anything he imagines into reality. Any of these 3 things, he can just make He can read your mind, enter your imaginations, look into your dreams and nightmares, and pull out anything, even from his own mind. But that's even not just it. That makes no sense grammatically. So, that's not even it. As another one of his abilities, and there's more, there's going to be more, is Deku controls death, or at least the lethal amount of death. What I mean by this is Deku could manipulate the aspects of, human conditions. And this is, in a sense, the best way I can do a reference is the disaster ability of the Fairy Kings from Seven Deadly Sins, letting him to move the conditions of someone to either make it better or worse. Status promotion, status demotion. Which, well, promotion, demotion, yeah. Now, this kinda is a slight variant of his father's quirk yet again, which lets him manipulate how variables work. Now, I can explain this more easier with Todoroki being able to get burned by his quirk. He can shift it to where the moment Todoroki lights up, his skin's vulnerability would be like dry, just, what would be the right word? Hay, mixed in with, some charcoal, along with a few cadavers, a bit of gasoline, some nitrogen, some petroleum jelly, just a few cans of propane launched in there, and then launch a fucking nuke in there, and then you have what Izuku could pretty much make, the burns of Todoroki's flames have the effect on his own skin. Yeah, I'm making him busted, and this is why they're afraid of Izuku, but there's more. Oh, there's more. Because of this control over life and death, it's... Whew. There's more. There's more. Of course, I give Izuku more. Deku also is able to sense people where they are. He can sense their emotions, their fears, and thanks to his ability to conjure, their imaginations, dreams, fears, nightmares, all that good jazz, he's able to draw in its power, as if it was a fuel source for him to just tap into from other people. It just turns into this red energy that leaks out of them, goes into him, and he gets even stronger. The fear gives him strength. But not just fear, though. Any emotion towards Izuku empowers him. Because Deku, in his mind, had made this strange rule that rather than let anyone tear him down, he will use it all as motivation, all as fuel to make him stronger. Now, this allowed him to tap into people's energy and, in a sense, absorb it and put it into himself. Now, this is what lets him tap into empathy. Any emotions that people feel, he can, be controlled by as well. But since he has a much, much stronger resolve than they do, he turns their emotions into fuel for himself. Which, yes, even more bullshit, but there's even more. Say if Deku is still, has the odds still against him. It's still a 5-on-1 fight with people the size of Muscular and Rappa, Nomu-sized motherfuckers trying to fight Deku. Deku would need a miracle, in a sense. Now, this miracle could be, Anywhere from Deku getting insanely, and I mean insanely ripped, where his body starts to bulk up, Hulk out, if you will, matching like the bodies of the others. But there's more to it than that. You know, every time they would fight, as the fight continues, they would get more tired, they'd start to lose their strength, as Deku would just be growing more and more. Oh no, what's happening to them? It's like everything is turning in towards Deku's favor. A balance is being tipped towards him. The scales are moving in, Deku's favor. A ability to stack, variables towards his benefit, if you will. Another form of fate manipulation, I guess you can say. Now, I guess you can say, I'm trying to think on a reference that would be really good, but I got nothing in mind. Okay. But no. So, let me just explain more, I guess, rather than give you more reference or just elaborate more. So, back to that, 5v1 fight. The fight continues. They keep on losing strength. Deku's just getting stronger and stronger. Eventually they realize their quirks aren't activating at the right times. Their quirks are starting to malfunction. People are starting to get heated and they're starting to fight one another. Deku could use this to his advantage and manipulate the negative emotions that, he senses and, make it where, he tells them, this tipped in my favor. I can make, some good mojo, some good power, towards you. Distribute some of this accumulated power that I gain and give it towards you. Through this, Deku would, I guess you could say, make them stronger or rejuvenate them. Give them a miracle. Make it where not just the second wind happens, but maybe they get a breakthrough with their quirk or their stamina or, a limit-breaking power happens as they get their second wind. I guess you could say if for Rappa, since he can make constant muscles, and rather than make a giant world of muscles around him, because that sounds disgusting. Oh god, disgusting. It would be, he could take all the muscles he makes and then fold them into one of each other, condensing down the strength, so he does not lose, the power, but gains speed. Without any, I guess you could say, it's just for him not to be as a big a target. He can dodge easier, move around, be more nimble. I mean, yes, he would have the muscles to move, but he becomes like Sloth. How big he was. Once he goes into a straight line, it doesn't really give him a lot of maneuverability. This counteracts it in a sense. Also, it would be as he could shoot out the muscle tendrils and just control them however he sees fit, which also disgusting, but that's a good example of what I mean when I say Deku could share and gift a miracle to someone and they could get a granted buff of their own. Now, Deku won't really be using this ability. In case you guys are wondering, is he gonna make an army? Is he gonna rebel? No. You see, there's more to this. As the Doctor continues to explain that Deku not only has this strange aura, within him that makes him stronger, that also seems to connect to his ability to change reality, because it seems that his eyes do, and it's really hard to notice since his eyes are already red, but they glow. The more energy he outputs, the more he would show. They even explain that when Deku was constantly using his power, bringing it out more and more, he explained that, he could feel it bubbling within him. Like it's more, like it's not fully surfaced. Kind of like boiling magma in a volcano. Like the more he's putting out his power, the more pressure he's building up until it will blow out. Now, he doesn't know if this is going to be good or bad. And they're going to say it's bad for right now because of his body. Which they don't know if it's true or not. But it's just so they can, in a sense, have an excuse to, let Inko try and convince Deku not to be like his father. Gatorade. Riptide Rush. Now, Izuku, once he's, has this alone time with his mom, she begs and she pleads with Izuku, that if, no matter what happens to her, or anything that people say to him, that he would, prove to them that he is not what they say. He is better than what they are making him out to be. That he is not his father. That the sins of the father do not affect him. He will face much discrimination and much hardships ahead of him. But, Inko says she loves Izuku. Izuku's confused on why this is sounding like a goodbye. Which, Inko's saying, because it kinda is, sweetie. Izuku's eyes widen. Are you abandoning me, Mom? No, sweetie. I'm making this sad. As Inko says, she has to start working overseas now. Due to, her job causing being destroyed because of all the buildings in the giant fight. They got a massive deal which allows them to, leave Japan and start over in a different city across, the world. And Inko would get a nice promotion since our boss was killed during the onslaught, which she was low-key happy about because he was kind of a dick, but that's neither here nor is it there. Izuku looks at his mom, saying, "You're not gonna be here then," as Inko grabs onto her son, holding him and caressing him tenderly and carefully, explaining that she doesn't want to leave him, but, she has to. She has to work and make money for them. She'll send him money every 2 weeks, and, you might not like her son, but Mitsuki said that she would, every now and then, she'd come and check on you. Deku, he just nods as he has no choice but to kind of accept this. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you when I say the household of the Hado family is very good. Because Nejire's father, I'm not gonna lie to you, this man is a very drunk, abusive person, which might surprise you, but this is one of the reasons why Nejire tries to be a very bubbly person. She will not let the hardships of her family disrupt her, drive to be not only a great hero, but make the world a better place for everyone. As, oh boy, this night her father got so motherfucking drunk that when he beat the ever-living fuck out of the mother, it caused the mom to, fall into critical condition, and she falls into a coma. Child services come, they remove, Nejire and Liz, as Ryuk decides to adopt Nejire. However, Ryuk did not like Liz's quirk. She was being kinda creeped out by it. this whole essence of darkness thing didn't sit well with her. As, you know, before, you know, Inko was leaving, Deku would see, Liz being taken by other people. Just to small town, sake of shits and giggles, don't worry about that. It's for my sanity and the sake of bullshit. As, he runs towards Liz as, the cop stops as they say, "Do you know her?" Deku nods as, he's still a child. And Inko's just like, shit. Alright then. She pretends and she lies to the police officers and the heroes that she's going to, she's just going on a trip for 2 weeks and her friend will be watching Izuku. So, they pretty much, not really looking too much detail into it, and Ryuk also kinda glad to kinda just pawn off this child who she deems as creepy, without even getting to know Liz. Poor Liz. As, she's just saying, it's fine. She seems trustworthy, and since the kid already knows her, it might be best if the child has a friend. As, Najire leaves Liz, and Liz cries. We time skip about 5 years. They're 9 years old, as Inko still sends money over. Mitsuki, she visits once a month. Deku and Liz have grown very, very close to one another. The two have become very, very, I guess you could say, close? It's strange to explain it. You see, the two had this unspoken connection that never needed to be said for anything. What this translates to for both of them is they never needed to speak to one another to know what each other needed. There would be some times when, Liz would be crying and Deku would show up with everything that Liz could need to make her feel better. He would have her favorite snacks, treats. He would come in with a fuzzy blanket and a decent movie for them to watch together. He would sometimes bring her manga. Every now and then help her with her studies when she needed it. And when Deku would be lonely because he didn't have his own mom too, so, the two didn't they had some connections. They could share the pain. Deku, he also kind of hated how, people would scowl at him for his quirk, as Liz would see this and she would understand too. The two would understand being outcasts. Now, I'm sorry for those who would like Toga to be more involved in this, but this is where things get more interesting. As, during this time, I would say Toga's little blood fetish starts to become too much for her to handle. As one night she starts to see a cute boy that, she saw it was black hair, red eyes that looked like they were blood. Like blood, and she just couldn't help but follow and stalk him. She saw that, there was this one girl who, she just couldn't help but to hate due to, having Izuku already liking her. She saw that Izuku was treating this girl way, way better than anything she's ever been treated, and it pissed her off. She couldn't stand it. Oh shit. I guess you're wondering, what does this have to do? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I thought that was just adorable. Anyway, as we're continuing on with this, also more cool Eevee evolutions, the further evolutions. I love Eevee. I love this too. This is just too cool. Too much fan service. No. I love it. I'm just scrolling at this point and I totally forgot about my what if. Anyway, as Toga decides, she is going to sneak in and steal Elizabeth's blood. in hopes, she could replace Elizabeth and be Elizabeth. Granted, she'll have to keep her hidden and abandon her whole family, but she thinks this is going to be a great idea. As, Liz is in the shower, and Deku, he's preparing dinner. The two have learned how to cook and wash dishes, laundry, all that. Deku, who had always been a very helpful boy around the house, it didn't take him long to learn, as Liz was terrible at cooking, and just on the occasions a bit of a klutz. So, yeah. Anyway, as you know, Toga would sneak in through a window and go in through the bathroom. She has her own knife. As Liz is shampooing, not really paying attention, but Deku, he could sense something's off. He doesn't know what it is, but, he stops. He puts the knife down. He leaves his pork cutlets down. They're close to being breaded. He's going to make some tonkatsu. Was it tonkatsu ramen? No, tonkatsu on rice. Fried pork, right? Like fried pork cutlets with some rice, some nice iceberg lettuce salad, and a little bit of that on the side with some ginger and kimchi. Nice refreshing shit. As he feels the disturbance in the force, he grabs not the knife, but just a towel. Nani? I will watch this later. As Izuku continues to just casually walk by, as now he covers his face with this towel because, he can see that the door is cracked in the bathroom, and as far as he could tell, that wasn't like that when Liz, showers. The two have a very distinct understanding that, nothing, and I mean nothing, until they're at least in high school. So, I want the two admit they kind of like each other. They're not allowed to do anything, as, it's kind of too early for them to do that shit, you sickos. So we're continuing on. As all of a sudden you hear a scream as Deku rushes in. Now, granted, he can sense energy just fine, so he knows, not everything's good. So, he goes in through the door. He sticks out his hand as, he could sense the strongest amount of fear was coming from Toga. Now, he didn't know who she was. He could just tell that this is not Liz, and Liz showed rage, not fear. Toga reeked of fear. And Izuku was able to harness this energy and shoot out a red bullet, piercing Toga's arm. The same arm that she was holding her knife, as, she drops the knife as she yells in pain, as then Izuku's saying, erode. As Toga's fear, something in her quirk that made her, have a nightmare just one time. Just one time. And it was a type of fear that she was able to suppress. That wasn't until, she saw Elizabeth survive the stab that was meant, to cripple someone. As not only did the stab wound, get repelled out of her by darkness as the wound closed, Elizabeth's eyes, they became hollowed, as the mark on her shoulder and her thigh, because they're birthmarks for her, in case you were wondering. Yeah, she was born with the marks of the Demon King on her body, on her left shoulder and left thigh. Now, that is not my consent, and y'all don't need to worry about it. As the darkness then surrounded Elizabeth's body, entering assault mode. and Elizabeth oozed in killing intent. Of course, Izuku, you know, he could sense this, but it didn't terrify him. He understood that things needed to be done, but this fear triggered Toga's memory, a nightmare of hers that, because of her quirk and needing to constantly ingest blood, she would see herself, melting away, becoming someone else, and then, Nani? Oh yes, about that. Anyway, as Izuku saw that her fear of melting away, Deku knew it. And now he makes it into existence as, through that one wound where her blood starts to ooze out, he decides to liquefy her body, through that wound. Now this is painful for Toga. I'm not gonna lie to you. As her arm begins to completely turn into sludge, a liquid. Yeah, it's not looking good for her. As her arm, falls off, splats, as, it's traveling up her arm, as, Izuku stops it by a simple, his hand at this point is glowing like a red keyblade, slice, and he cut off from her shoulder straight down. She barely had lost her up to her elbow, so yeah, he cut off more of the arm. That wasn't liquefying, but of course she's using more of her fear, as of course she was afraid of some animals, as skipping. Only because I won't be able to get back into this because I'd be too distracted. No. Yes. Fuck. Anyway, as from her severed arm wound, spiders start to crawl out, and they start to wrap silk around her. Now, Elizabeth is just staring at Izuku, because, this is how he captures Toga, as from there also a giant red serpent appears, biting Toga in the neck, causing her to fall down. Deku's looking at Elizabeth as he's saying, "Are you okay?" As, she's still in assault mode, so the darkness is covering everything. As, her eyes turn normal, but she does not deactivate from, eyes down. She looks at Izuku as, holy shit, in his back, excluding our 4 wings. Red wings, they're made out of red light in a sense, but it's how they look. They're almost angelic. And on his head, there's this dark red star. It's in a weird circle too, but there seems to be writings and kanjis around it. She can't really tell, but Deku seems to be this weird anti-angel. Oh yes. Behold what Deku will call his quirk. Oh, Deku's hero name is going to be Anti-Angel. Well, yeah. The end. Which, since his ability is not just rewriting reality, but manipulating life and death, it just goes on and on. And now we are tragically going to kill off Toga, as Liz says that, she tries to kill her, as Deku saying, "Got it, he will end this," as Liz sticks out her hand and saying, "No." She appreciates it. She blushes as, she smiles that Deku wouldn't hesitate, to kill someone for her, just because, they tried to hurt her. She thought that maybe Deku wouldn't be too thrilled with, the killing, but, nah. Shit. As, the two look at each other, and they knew, they just knew that they were the one for each other. As then Toga starts bawling, as, she's saying she just wanted that happiness. As Elizabeth says, true, you might have wanted the happiness we share, but, you are going to do something that, not even God could save her from. A sin to Elizabeth that required punishment by death, and yeah, it would have been to touch her Izuku, which, she says with a slight sadistic smile on her face, as, black flames appear in her hand, as, she just says, Hellfire Wave, and Toga is pretty much turned to ash, as Izuku just looks at Elizabeth, and he's just, like, in awe, as his heart beats faster, as, she just looks, she tries to play the innocent look, as, she's just saying, is that too much? She gives him a giggle, as, Deku's heart is just like, ba-dunk, da-dink, or whatever the weird sound effect is that they do for it, when someone gets their heart stabbed by Cupid in anime, which is bullshit, but I then... Sorry about that, I had something to take out real quick, as my cat wanted some attention. By attention, I mean she wanted food. So, yes. In case you're wondering, yes, it is my cat, Chungus. Which, aka I call her Mustache Cat. Anyway, as we're continuing with, Deku, he has this red anti-angel form, which, Elizabeth's, dark angel form, she fully manifests into Izuku, as, she sprouts 6 black wings over her head, it's the mark of the goddess symbol, but only dark appears over her head rather than a halo, as, the two walks towards each other, as, they hold hands and just stare into each other's eyes, as they realize, this is who they're meant to be with. They found each other, and they're happy. Now, we do another time skip, another 5 years, if you will. It is now time for, the UA entrance exam, and though Liz never, talked to Najire after, them being split up, thanks to Ryuk making it very difficult. Of course, Najire didn't know about this, so sad, but, they'll see each other soon. As, the entrance exam would go, the written exam goes with, those two tying for first place, getting perfect scores. The girls are staring at, Deku for being a bulky motherfucking tank, as, guys are eyeing Elizabeth, as her outfit is pretty much as you're seeing it there. She's letting her 2 marks appear. She is wearing thigh stockings and boots. So she's showing skin, but not a lot of skin, but still showing. At least the outfit complements what she shows, if you will. Now, Deku and her, they are not at the same testing grounds, unfortunately. But, things go as normal. With Deku speed blitzing Ida, when the gates open, Deku just ultimately is obliterating robots smashing them with his hands, elbows, knees. On the occasions, he would shoot out a red energy blast. Sometimes he would make the energy blades on his hands as he would slice the robot's arms off, grab the robot's arm, and then beat said robot with its own arm. Then throw that arm at another robot. He could also, which, to the surprise of other people, then make the robots start glowing red. Their entire bodies would glow as they would then be put back together, which after Deku broke 10 robots, like 5 3-pointers, 2 1-pointers, and the rest were 2 point. Hey, yeah, 2 2-pointers, and the rest 3 1-pointers, 5 3-pointers. Yes, as once he decided to break 100, and these were the last 10 he broke, he decided to make them all, with his energy, turn into 5 robots, and then have them destroy robots for him. Granted, when people would also, be injured because they hurt themselves or strained themselves from overusing their quirk, and that allowed the robot to hurt them, Deku would have their energy robots, bring it towards him, as he would then share some of his energy, relieving some of their pain, but not fully healing them. He doesn't want to show like he can, do full heals, which he can, but he doesn't want to make it, known to everyone. He just wants to make it seem like, oh, this is as far as I can go for right now. Here you go. You're in, pretty much where you can limp on your own. Godspeed. As Deku would approach the number 1 score, so he would think, as he would tie with Elizabeth, both scoring exact 600 points. But Elizabeth, the difference in here is Deku would score 400 villain points and 200 hero points, as Elizabeth was 200 villain points and 400 hero points, with Elizabeth being more helpful, assistant, and actually healing people all the way. And would restrain robots to help them destroy the robots. Allowing people to get more points rather than, her stealing the robots' kill from them. Which she didn't really care about the points, she was just surprised. Of course, that's in the future, as, of course, the 0-pointer happens. Deku causes his 10 robot destruction creations to form into one, and then proceeds to go towards the 0-pointer with it, as it takes it down due to it being more compact thanks to Deku's imagination. But he did realize one thing. Its joints are probably its most best way to hit, so he decides in the structuring that, his robot, it decided to self-destruct its pieces that it ripped off of its own body. It ripped off its own 2 legs and threw it at its arms at the giant robot, getting it stuck in between its elbows. Then it ripped off its one arm, as Deku then ripped off its head, other arm, and threw it at the robots in certain angles where it would pierce its armor, stopping it but not doing much else. As then Deku decides, to make the things much more worse. As, he decides to initiate a self-destruct in the robots that already existed, that he never removed, but compressed down. So when they blow up into the wounds of the robot, Deku then takes this chance to make those wounds even worse, which causes the robot to literally start breaking down before everyone's eyes, as Deku's still not even breaking a sweat. He cracks a smile, which, the robot collapses into just smoke and metal. Everyone's just like, what the fuck? As, Deku sees Uraraka still in the rubble, as, he's just like, damn. He decides to do something fun, and he decides to switch Ida with Uraraka. They switch places. They're confused. As Ida's just like, wait, how could you do this to me? I'm Tenya Ida. As Izuku's just like, yeah, but she could use some rescue points too, I'm guessing. As, Uraraka's just like, huh? As Deku's saying your quirk is zero gravity and you have this heavy object in front of you. I'm pretty sure you can figure out what I'm letting you do. As he yawns, kind of like that, as he walks away. Of course, everyone is baffled by Izuku. Uraraka still helps Ida. Time runs out after that, as they don't know how to feel. Of course, I love this song. Well, it is Isabella's Lullaby from The Promised Neverland, if y'all don't know. Oh, well, that shit hurts so bad, my guy. I love the manga and the anime. I love them both. Shout out to Sarah Beltran who told me about the things. She also used to be my hairdresser, but I stopped going and I don't know why, but oh well. We're not on bad terms, honestly. So, oh well. Where was I? Oh yeah, as Elizabeth and Deku, they're at their house, when they hear a knock on the door, which, oh no, it is Ryuk. Why is she here? Well, Ryuk has this strange look on her face, almost of guilt and slight shame, but, all of a sudden she gets bumped out of the way by our true hero right now, as it is Nejire Hado, who, once she sees her sister, the two instantly recognize each other, and, of course, as, kids, they had that weird, I don't like you for some reason, but, time apart has caused, the two to actually miss each other. Despite what people might have thought, with them being almost like polar opposites, the two did love each other and they missed each other. So this nice tender hug of the two was nice, as Ryuk hands Deku a envelope and saying Nejire Hado wanted to personally deliver this to her sister and you, who are Izuku Midoriya, as since they shared the same address, to allow Nejire to visit them, as this has the special effect of allowing Nejire to not only know where Izuku lives, but allow her to, I guess you can say, make sure they always get to school. That I will bring up later. Later is probably within like 10 to 7 to 10 minutes, honestly. Let's go with it as pause. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, not sorry. As Nejire and Izuku look at each other, as Nejire, she tells Izuku that she thanks her for watching her sister, but it's about time that Liz goes home with her, since they're at this age where it might be looked down upon, since they're relatively young. It might have been fine now, but she's looking around as she doesn't see Inko, as they're looking at one another. They gulp, as they don't know how to explain it, as Deku says his mom's been gone like for a couple years now. They've just been living with each other and nothing bad happens. This is when Liz breaks out of the hug, and she then goes to Izuku's side. She wraps her arm around Izuku, as, she looks scared. She's looking at her sister and saying, "What do you mean I have to... Are you saying I have to leave Izuku?" As Nedre is kind of surprised. She didn't think she'd have this kind of reaction, but she's not going to give up yet. So she says, yeah, come with me, please, little sis." As Elizabeth shakes her head, she's saying she loves Izuku. Izuku blushes because he knows, but, just, it's been a rule that they just don't say it because they don't, they both get really flustered with their emotions, their actual genuine emotions. Liz would, she's already clumsy, so her being flustered is really bad. But Deku, when he's flustered, oh my god, can he not stop? As, yeah. Nedre looks at Izuku as, she's eyeing him up and down. She sees that Deku is a very well-developed person. As, she's just saying, "Liz, just one question. And, we'll leave. For now." As, Izuku nods as Liz lets go of Izuku and goes towards her sister. As, they do an open hug. They hug one more time. As Nedre asks, "Are you still a virgin?" As, Liz gets very embarrassed, but, she's saying, yes, Deku's very safe. As Nedre nods and she's saying, "Okay, good." And, she just walks away. Her and Ryuk leave as, the two have their own thing. Of course, Deku asks Liz what the question was. Liz gets very embarrassed when she asks this, and she admits, she's still a virgin. And so Deku's confused on why they wanted to know this, as Liz didn't really know, but Deku, he smiles and he blushes too, because, he had some thoughts, as, Liz knew what he was thinking of, as, she starts squirming in her body around little by little, as she looks at Izuku, as Izuku can pick up on what she's thinking, as, she's waiting for him to say it. Izuku knows what she means, as Deku nods, as, he goes up to her, he places his hand on her cheek, starts slowly caressing her face, as he tilts her chin up, he looks her in the eyes, as he just says, "I love you, Liz Hato," and, he kisses her. The two share a very nice, intimate, tonsil hockey fight today. Now, of course, they get more touchy-feely, and, Liz is just like, they can't go all the way, but she has had these thoughts about Izuku. She's read these books about things that they can do, still keeping them nice. As, Deku's saying he knows, he's read the books too. As, he says he wants to try something called the tongue tornado on her. As, she nods. As, they start kissing again. Deku, he begins to give Liz a nice, thorough chest massage. At first clothes are on, but, he can't control his lust, so he rips off her, shirt, as he then proceeds to, suckle up on her. Breastises, licking, biting, nibbling on her nipples, pinching and twisting ever so slightly. This man is, I guess you can say, over ecstatic and hyper with, his ability to, feel. He's loving it. He's enjoying himself. And, of course, so is Elizabeth. Of course, Elizabeth enjoys this so much that, she climaxes. She comes as, Deku's just like, wow. As, you know, he decides that since it is his fault that, Liz made a slight mess, it's fair for him to, clean it for her. As Liz is just like, no, don't do that. As Deku decides to, say, oh, no, no, no. As, he kisses her on the lips. As he's saying, he'll be gentle. As he goes down on her and proceeds to give her the tongue tornado, lapping up, her love juices. I'm trying to find a good way to say the words without, getting too graphic, due to the fact that I just don't want to feel like I need to, brush my teeth and, rinse out with vodka. So, as I continue this, Deku, he eats out Liz. She comes the next 2 more times as her thighs crush and wrap Izuku in. And she's panting heavily as Deku, he kisses her again. The two exchange more bodily fluids through saliva, and Liz's love juices. Liz, she wraps her thighs around Deku, her legs, hooking him in. As, Deku's just like, what? I thought you said. As Liz is just saying, she doesn't know much else to do. She knows she can't please Deku as well as he did with her mouth, since she's never done anything, and she can feel how, much Deku is packing. This man's got he's got the fruit. He's got an extra, 12 inches down there in his pants, just ready to burst through. As, Liz, she looks at Deku in the eyes as she says, just be gentle. As, she caresses his cheek. As, she's saying she loves him. And, it was only a matter of time before the two do it anyway. As she says, this way, before UA. And their entire time there, they can be as, a couple, as lovers, all the way through. As Deku smiles, nods, as he proceeds to deflower Elizabeth, and he himself casts off the shackles of chastity and purity. As Deku, for the next 2.5 hours, he would tenderly, stroke into Elizabeth, not being too gentle because he himself is on the verge of climaxing with every single stroke due to, new sensations and sensitivity levels being off the chart. As, the demon marks on Elizabeth's left side on her arm and thigh, they start glowing black as, they react and wrap around her body. It ends up creating a cocoon of darkness around both of them. As, Liz is finally gotten adjusted and accustomed to, the size, the thrusting direction, enough to where she only feels pure pleasure. And now she's wanting more. So she tells Izuku to start speeding up, going harder, tensing up more. Deku does so, as he would nibble on her neck, blow in her ear. On the occasions, light licks on her collarbone. And I don't mean his leaving trails of saliva. I just mean I guess if you've never done oral, you don't really know, but just where it's just barely the tip of his tongue is tracing on her collarbone. Which, if y'all don't know these tricks, try them out and see what happens. And my guy, if you're not getting a waterfall reaction, then I feel like you're doing it wrong. So, tip of your tongue, the collarbone, slight nibble on her earlobe, lightly blow in her ear, kiss around the neck, and on occasion, and I do mean on occasion, do a kiss that would lightly, and I do mean ever so lightly, suck out on her cheek, to just show more intimacy and more oral fixation. But if that's not your thing, that's not your thing. I'm not going to judge you or shame you if you can't do that shit. I just happen to be a linguistics major. I can tie a cherry stem in my mouth, just using my, tongue in less than a minute. So if y'all can't do that, I'm sorry. But the vibe Kage is strong with the tongue vibes. That's all I can say to boost myself. And, Deku, he obviously could not withstand it for much longer, but he does pick up speed, and, this does exceed more, this exceeds the capacity for pleasure that Elizabeth was expecting, and she starts, convulsing in pleasure and climaxes with Deku inside of her. She squeezes and wraps her legs around him. Her nails grow out. Her teeth, jagged eyes. As, she gets this Endora-like transformation that, terrifying, but still, Izuku is bounded by her dark, alluring beauty. He can't look away. He doesn't sense danger. He sees, this monsterization of his loved one, but he doesn't see her as a monster still. He sees that this is, her in her, most wildest, purest instincts. This is her in a state of, pure bliss, of pure pleasure. And Deku accepts it wholeheartedly and willingly, as he does Milky Release no Jutsu. As, I'm gonna change this song. Have my shit hooked up to here. Oh, and then you realize shuffle's not on. One of my favorite ones. Lay me down in my bed of glass. Sorry, I love Solomon King. Anyway, feel before I go. My bad, guys. I didn't mean to get distracted like that. As, Deku, Milky Release Jutsu, as, it's inside of Elizabeth, as, the two couldn't help it. As, the black cocoon falls, Elizabeth returns to her normal side. As, unbeknownst to the two of them, a black crest similar to Elizabeth's left shoulder appeared on Deku's right shoulder over his, arm. As not only that, a red star formed on Elizabeth's right shoulder. As, yes, this red star is just a regular red pentagram. Pentagram. That it looks like the Quincy cross, and if you've not gotten it up to this point, I've pretty much made him a negative anti-Yuhabak with Quincy-esque powers from his Wunderlich, which was his Royal Guard squadron that fucked shit up in the Serete. Now, I'm ending it here because, school starts the next day for them, and, they need their rest, and I'm going to be eating myself some food while I watch other YouTube videos. As I end this, I hope you guys enjoy. This is the Vibe Kage signing out. And the only other tip I can tell you is if you are going to use any form of prophylactic / protection, do not ever use Trojan Fire and Ice, the icy hot one. That shit felt like I had just cut jalapenos and then grabbed my junk. to explain their heat lube as the burning sensation, God no, that shit fucking sucked. Oh my god. I still cringe in remembering, as it just felt like my fucking dick was on fire because of a goddamn condom. And that is the end of this video.